Hey mama, welcome to Parently. I'm Annabelle, RN, BSN, birth doula, and mama of two. And today we're talking about what are the signs of active labor. Active labor is really when you want to head to the hospital, and this is going to help labor progress more smoothly. It's going to help labor progress faster, and it's actually going to decrease your C-section rate by 50% if you arrive at the hospital in active labor rather than in the early phase of labor. And we're really going to talk about what active labor looks like and why it decreases your risk for C-section. Before we get any further, make sure that you subscribe to this channel if you're interested in the content for a natural birth, and ring the bell to stay up to date with the latest videos. Also, I have a natural birth workbook that I have created just for you to help you think about natural birth, create a plan, learn how to engage your body, and really get your natural birth down to a confidence builder before you actually get there. So if you want to check that out, it's in the link below. So active labor, what does that mean? Well, we really think about contractions when we think about labor and labor starting and the progress of getting to birth and the point where you get to hold your baby. And so contractions can be a little bit confusing because we think as moms any sort of pain in our abdominal area when we're pregnant and we're close to our due date, that means that we are heading into labor and our baby's going to be born. But the thing with contractions is that we have different kinds of contractions. For one, we have Braxton-hicks contractions, and I have a whole separate video on Braxton-hicks contractions and what they look like. They're not going to be consistent, so the interval between each contraction, the time limit is going to change. The intensity of the contraction is going to change. It's just going to be a little uncomfortable, but you can usually just keep going through life and feel like, okay, these are going to go away. When you sit down and rest, usually the contractions will go away, or if you drink a lot of water, those contractions will go away. So Braxton-hicks are really just your body, your uterus, starting to practice what contractions are going to be like for labor. Contractions mean that your uterus, which is a big muscle, is starting to flex, just like your bicep is going to flex. And so your uterus needs to kind of get in the groove before labor starts. And that's a Braxton-hicks contractions. If you want to hear more about that, check out my video on Braxton-hicks. But then we get closer to our due date and our body really needs to start revving up for the labor process. And we start out in early labor. Early labor can take a long time for a lot of moms. It can take hours and hours and hours a day, maybe even up to 48 hours. So it can take a long time. And early labor is the point of labor where our cervix is starting to change. And then when we have our cervix change from maybe 0 centimeters, so it's completely closed, up to 6 centimeters, where it's open to 6 centimeters. And that's when we get into the active labor phase, is at 6 centimeters. So in early labor, the contractions are going to be painful, but moms can usually kind of keep working through them. They take a breath, they think, okay, yeah, that was uncomfortable, but I could handle it. And like I said, early labor can take a long time, and the time limit between each contraction is going to shorten. So a lot of moms, when they start into early labor and those contractions are starting to intensify and the time limit is getting shorter between each, and the contractions are lasting anywhere from 30 seconds to maybe a minute, they think, okay, now's the time to go to the hospital. But the problem with this is that we have so many moms coming into the hospital before their cervix is dilated to 6 centimeters and they are being sent home. And this could happen once for a mom, it could happen twice, and nobody wants to go all the way to the hospital and then be sent home. That's discouraging, that's just frustrating. It's a long process to get to the hospital and to get checked in and then to have the nurse come in and do all this paperwork and check everything, and it's just a long process, and to be sent home is not fun. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. The reason that nurses and doctors send moms home in early labor is because when you're in the early labor phase, your body is really just trying to get into a labor groove. And like I said, this could take several hours. And we don't want to keep moms at the hospital for all those hours because that can actually take mom when she is starting to get into labor process and really push things back. It can back things up. So mom's at home, she's laboring, she goes to the hospital, there's bright lights, there's a lot going on, and mom has hormones being released from her brain down to her uterus and throughout her body that's causing contractions, that's causing her cervix to open and thin out, and really helping her cope with the labor process. Well, like I said, in early labor, your body's just trying to figure things out, trying to get in the labor groove. And so if mom goes into the hospital in early labor while her body's still trying to figure everything out, that can inhibit those hormones that are being released, the oxytocin and the endorphins, from working like they should be in the body. And then what was working, what the labor process that was pushing forward and getting mom in the labor groove, that can be inhibited, and then labor could take even longer than it was going to from the start. So when you're in early labor, we want to stay home. What does active labor look like? How do you know that you're in active labor? And that's when it's time to go to the hospital, where your cervix is 6 centimeters and you're going to be able to be admitted and stay in the hospital and really get to the point where you deliver your baby smoothly and successfully vaginally, because that's what we want. Yes, some moms say that they want C-sections, but C-section is major abdominal surgery, and it is not healthy for mom. It's not the healthiest choice unless there's a medical reason. It can be medically, it can cause problems for babies that are born by C-section usually have a higher rate of respiratory problems afterwards. And so unless there is a medical indication, we want to try to stay away from C-sections. I know I've had lots of comments that say, well, what if mom wants a C-section, or, C-section saved lives, and they do. But vaginal birth is best for mom and baby when there is not a medical condition that is indicating that mom and baby need to have a C-section, that it's safe for them. So vaginal birth, how to know to go to the hospital in active labor. Well, your contractions are going to be regular. So what does regular mean? Well, it means that the time between each contraction is either the same or it's shortening. So we have a contraction, it builds, it peaks, and then it goes away. And we have a time before the next contraction starts again. That is an interval, and it needs to be regular. So when you are in the active labor phase, it's usually, it's going to decrease, and it can be 5 minutes between, and then it's going to shorten to maybe 4 minutes between, 3 minutes between. And when you are in the active labor phase, that time frame is going to be around every 3 minutes, you're going to have a contraction. So anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes for that interval. The time of the contraction. For each mom, this is going to be different. Again, as you're in early labor, the time of the contraction, how long it lasts, is going to be shorter because your body is revving up for labor. And as you get into the active labor phase, that contraction is going to last longer. Maybe a minute, so 60 seconds, maybe a minute and a half, 90 seconds. The cool thing about our body as women is that each contraction is going to be a little bit different. The intensity is going to be a little bit different, and how long it lasts is going to be a little bit different. And this is our body coping with the event that's happening. A contraction can be very painful, and so our body knows, okay, that was a very painful contraction. This next one is going to be a little bit less painful so that you can cope with the contractions over a long period of time. And then lastly, the pain is going to be intensifying, and this is going to last for at least an hour. So we're looking at mom's demeanor. It's changing. When mom's in the early phase of labor, she takes on a contraction and it was painful, but she could probably still function. She could still talk to her partner or her doula or anyone that's in the room. It might be very uncomfortable to talk and function, but she can. When mom gets into the active phase of labor, her demeanor really starts to change. What I like to call, the mom becomes very primal. She starts doing things that are not really her. We think about people in society very put together. They are cognizant. They are comprehensible when they speak. Moms are not like this when they're in the active phase of labor. They start groaning. They start getting down on the floor in strange positions. They are not talking during the contraction. And even the rest period between the contraction is where mom is just trying to rest and recover from the contraction. So she's not excited anymore. She's not like, yes, we're in labor, let's do this. She is just trying to cope. And so she's become almost a different person, someone that you don't recognize as maybe the doula or the birth coach. And mom, even herself, when she thinks about herself, she's more in a dreamlike state. The endorphins that are being released from mom's brain into her body are helping with this. These endorphins are helping mom cope with the pain, but they put her into a very dream-like state. We call it nature's morphine because mom becomes very distant. She is just trying to cope with the situation. So that's active labor. You're having contractions with a regular interval. The intensity is also very regular. The pain is increasing, or it's at least staying the same. It's not getting better, it's just painful. And she is changing in her demeanor. Very much the labor process. There is a big difference between early labor and active labor. And so that's what we want. We want that pain to be there for at least an hour or more. And that's when mom says, okay, I know I'm in the active phase of labor, or the person that's with her as her birth coach or support person, you're in the active phase of labor, we need to go to the hospital. For first-time moms, this process, like I said, can take several hours. So the concern of, well, I live a long way away from the hospital, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it if I'm in the active phase of labor. It's painful to drive in the car when you're in the active phase of labor. I understand all of these things. Talk to your doctor about how far you live away from the hospital. If you're less than an hour away, if you're even like 45 minutes away from the hospital, this still applies, because once you're in the active phase of labor, your cervix is at 6 centimeters dilated, and based on all these signs and symptoms that I've just told you, indicating that your cervix has changed and it is 6 centimeters dilated, you are still going to have a lot of time in the active phase of labor, because you still have to get into the transition phase of labor, which is a shorter phase than the active phase, but you still have to get into that phase, and then you have to get into the pushing stage of labor, and that could take a couple hours if you're a first-time mom. So I know that there's some videos on YouTube that show moms giving birth in their car, and the thing is, that's a very small percentage. It is not likely, especially if you live even an hour away from the hospital or less, you're gonna have time to get to the hospital. It is painful to drive to the hospital in active labor. Now, if you're in active labor, you shouldn't be driving. You need someone else to be driving you to the hospital. A friend, a family member, your birth coach, somebody needs to be driving you to the hospital. And I understand, I was in active labor when my dad drove me and my husband to the hospital. It was bumpy, and I just had to close my eyes, continue to practice my breathing and coping techniques even in the car, and understand that when I get there, I'm getting closer and closer to birthing my baby. And so just keeping those thoughts in mind. I know it's going to be a little bit painful, but that is the process. The pain has a purpose. So let's talk a little bit about other things that might take you to the hospital before the active phase of labor. I'm really giving just some signs for active labor, but if you have other conditions or indications to go to the hospital earlier, then you should. So if, for one, motherly instinct, that should never be negated. You as a mom, if you feel like something just isn't right, I know I'm not in the active phase of labor, but something is wrong, then go to the hospital. Even if you get there and everything's fine and they say, nope, you need to go home, that's okay. But if you have that feeling of something is just not right, then go to the hospital. If your doctor says, no, I don't wait for my patients to come in till active labor because of this or this or this, or you have a medical condition or there's an indication why you need to come in before the active phase of labor, then listen to your doctor. This is just general information. This is not for every situation. And also, another question is, if you are GBS positive, should you be waiting till the active phase of labor? So GBS positive means that you are group B strep positive. It's a bacteria that lives in 1 in 4 women's vaginas. It's a very healthy bacteria for those women, and it's not a problem during your pregnancy. But then when you go to give birth and your baby comes down your birth canal and out of your vagina, that bacteria gets all over the baby, and there is a risk that your baby could get very sick from that bacteria. And so the recommendation is if you're going to give birth vaginally, then you need to come into the hospital and receive antibiotics in your vein, so IV, before you give birth. Some doctors have guidelines that say, no, you can labor at home and even into the active phase, and then you can come into the hospital. And as long as you get 2 rounds of antibiotics or 1 round, however they do it, before you give birth, then we're good. You just have to receive the antibiotics before you give birth. Other doctors say, no, as soon as you know that you're in labor, even in the early phase, come in and we'll start giving you those antibiotics. So talk to your doctor about what they recommend and follow those recommendations and guidelines. And then another question that I get from moms is, but what if my water breaks? So your bag of waters, the amniotic sac, and that is surrounding your baby, and all of the amniotic fluid that is inside that your baby's swimming around in, it will rupture most likely before you give birth. Some moms it doesn't, but for most moms, that bag of waters is going to rupture, that fluid's going to come out, and then your baby's going to be able to give birth. This happens at different times for moms. And so the question is, if I'm at home and maybe I'm not even in labor yet, or I'm in early labor and my bag of waters ruptures, should I go to the hospital? Again, it is determined by what your doctor says. So some doctors say once your bag of waters has ruptured, write down the time, make sure that it actually was your bag of waters, make sure you didn't just pee your pants. So go to the bathroom, empty your bladder out. If that fluid continues to leak, because it is from the urine of your baby, partly. So if that amniotic fluid continues to leak, then you know it was your bag of waters. So write down the time that happened. And then from that point, some doctors say 12 hours. Some doctors say make sure that you come in within 24 hours so that let me restate that. Some doctors say you need to be delivered by 12 hours or 24 hours, so you need to talk to your doctor. Active labor. There's a lot going on, and each mom is unique, each situation is unique. My biggest recommendation for you to know is to take a birth class, a childbirth class before you give birth, so that you can know and understand all of these different signs and how to listen to your body. Apparently, we do have a natural birth course, but if you want to take one at the hospital, if that's convenient for you, just make sure that you're taking some sort of class before you give birth. I'm going to put the link below for Apparently Natural Birth if you want to check it out. It's super convenient, it's online, and it's everything you need to know about natural birth. And so just make sure that you're in some sort of childbirth class before you give birth so that you can understand how your body works and what to look for before you go to the hospital. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell to stay up to date. I'll see you next time.